Clark Finn was adjusting the sound equipment outside the grand ballroom of Willowbrook Estate when he heard the desperate tapping on the second-floor window above him. The 32-year-old audio technician looked up to see a bride in an elaborate white gown frantically gesturing for help, tears streaming down her face. What he discovered next would shatter everything he thought he knew about justice and love. Ilara Finch wasn't just any runaway bride. She was about to marry the man who had murdered her parents 15 years ago. The wealthy businessman everyone respected, the man the entire town looked up to, had orchestrated her family's death and then spent years positioning himself to marry their daughter. Now, with the ceremony about to begin downstairs, Ilara had finally uncovered the horrifying truth. In the next 20 minutes, Clark would help her escape through that very window, setting off a chain of events that would expose a killer, heal 2 broken hearts, and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the courage to run toward the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clark Finn had been setting up sound equipment at Willowbrook Estate for nearly 3 hours, and he still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this wedding. As the owner of Maplewood Audio Services, he'd worked hundreds of events over the past 5 years, and he'd developed an instinct for reading the energy of a celebration. This one felt wrong. The groom, Vincent Sterling, was everything you'd expect from Thornfield's wealthiest businessman, perfectly groomed, commanding presence, the kind of man who owned half the town and made sure everyone knew it. But there was something cold in his eyes when he looked at his bride-to-be, something that made Clark uncomfortable every time he witnessed their interactions during the rehearsal. Clark adjusted the microphone at the altar, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. At 32, he looked older than his years, the result of 5 years of single parenthood and running his own business after his ex-wife had abandoned their family for a new life in California. His 10-year-old daughter Maya was the center of his world now, and every wedding gig like this helped pay for her piano lessons, her soccer gear, and the college fund he contributed to religiously every month. The estate itself was magnificent, a Culver's sprawling Victorian mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. Vincent Sterling had spared no expense for what the local newspaper was calling the wedding of the decade. Crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling, white roses adorned every surface, and a string quartet was warming up in the conservatory. It was the kind of fairy tale setting every bride dreamed of, yet Clark couldn't shake the feeling that the bride herself seemed more like a prisoner than a princess. He'd caught glimpses of Ilara Finch throughout the morning, a stunning 28-year-old, with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. She moved through the preparations like someone in a trance, responding to questions about flowers and music with mechanical precision. Her smiles never reached her eyes, and she flinched slightly whenever Sterling touched her shoulder or kissed her cheek. Clark was adjusting the speaker system near the garden when he heard it, a sharp, desperate tapping sound coming from somewhere above. He looked up to see a figure in white at a second-floor window, gesturing frantically. It was Ilara, still in her elaborate wedding gown, and she was clearly in distress. Their eyes met across the distance, and he saw raw terror in her gaze. She was mouthing something, pressing her hands against the glass, and pointing downward. Clark glanced around quickly. The wedding party was inside the main hall. Guests were arriving and mingling in the front gardens, and no one else seemed to have noticed the bride's desperate signals. He made a split-second decision that would change both their lives forever. Grabbing an extension ladder from his equipment truck, he moved it discreetly to the side of the building, directly beneath her window. Years of working construction before starting his audio business had taught him to move quickly and efficiently when someone needed help. Clark climbed the ladder with purposeful determination, his heart racing as he got closer to the window. Up close, he could see that Ilara's carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears, and her hands were shaking as she struggled with the window latch. "Help me," she whispered through the glass, her voice barely audible but her desperation unmistakable. "Please, I can't marry him." Her words caught in her throat as she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. Clark didn't hesitate. He pulled out his multi-tool and quickly worked to open the old window latch from the outside. The mechanisms were stiff with age, but his experienced hands made quick work of it. Within moments, the window swung open, and fresh air rushed into the stuffy bridal suite. "Ma'am, I don't know what's happening, but if you need to leave, I can help you," he said quietly, extending his hand toward her. "My name is Clark Finn. I'm working the sound for your wedding." Ilara looked at him with a mixture of desperation and hope. "Ilara Finch," she whispered back, gathering her voluminous skirts in her hands. "And this isn't my wedding, it's my nightmare." The sound of voices grew louder in the hallway behind her. Someone was approaching her door, and Ilara's eyes widened. "With panic, they can't find me gone," she said urgently. "Vincent will. Then we need to move now," Clark interrupted, his protective instincts kicking in. He'd seen enough fear in his daughter's eyes during the custody battle with his ex-wife to recognize genuine terror when he saw it. This woman needed help, and every second they delayed increased whatever danger she was facing. Ilara kicked off her white satin heels and carefully maneuvered her way through the window. Clark steadied her as she climbed onto the ladder, her wedding dress creating a cascade of white silk and lace that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a bride literally climbing out of her own wedding, and he was the one helping her escape. "Careful," he murmured as they descended together, his hand protectively placed on her back to steady her. Almost there. When they reached the ground, Clark quickly moved the ladder back to his truck while Ilara stood pressed against the side of the building, trying to catch her breath. Her elaborate updo was coming undone, and dirt from the window ledge had stained her pristine white gown, but she looked more alive than she had all morning. "Thank you," she breathed, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "You have no idea what you just did for me." Clark studied her face. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now: relief, determination, the look of someone who had just made the most important decision of their life. "We need to get you away from here," he said practically, glancing toward the main house where the wedding was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Ilara shook her head, and Clark saw a fresh wave of uncertainty cross her features. She was a woman who had just escaped from something terrible, but she clearly hadn't thought about what came next. "Then come with me," Clark said, making another split-second decision. "My truck is right here. We can figure out the rest once you're safe." As they moved quickly toward his vehicle, Clark couldn't help but wonder what kind of situation would drive a bride to climb out of her own wedding window. Whatever it was, he was certain of one thing: helping this woman was the right choice, regardless of the consequences. Clark's pickup truck was parked among the catering vehicles behind Willowbrook Estate, and he guided Ilara toward it with quick, purposeful steps. Her wedding dress was making it difficult to move quietly, the layers of satin and tulle rustling with every step, but she gathered the fabric in her arms and followed him without hesitation. "Get in," Clark said, opening the passenger door and helping her climb up into the cab. The sight of a bride in full wedding regalia sitting in his work truck, complete with audio equipment, coffee-stained receipts, and Maya's forgotten soccer cleats would have been comical under different circumstances. As Clark started the engine, Ilara turned to look back at the estate through the rear window. From their vantage point, they could see wedding guests arriving in luxury cars, the string quartet setting up on the terrace, and the photographer adjusting his equipment. Her entire world was proceeding exactly as planned, except for the fact that the bride had just vanished. "They'll notice I'm missing soon," Ilara said, her voice tight with anxiety. Vincent likes everything to run on schedule. When I don't appear for the final photos." She trailed off, her hands unconsciously gripping the bouquet she'd somehow managed to carry down the ladder with her. Clark drove carefully through the estate's winding driveway, trying to avoid drawing attention to his departure. Several catering staff members waved at him as they passed. He'd worked with many of them before, and they assumed he was just moving equipment. None of them looked twice at his passenger. "Where can we go?" Clark asked once they were safely on the main road. "Somewhere you'll feel safe enough to tell me what's really happening here." Ilara was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the familiar streets of Thornfield as they drove past. This was the town where she'd grown up, where everyone knew her family's story, where Vincent Sterling was considered one of the most respected citizens. How could she explain that the man everyone admired was the same person who had destroyed her life 15 years ago? "There's a diner," she said finally. "Rosewood Cafe, about 10 minutes outside town. Vincent never goes there. He considers it beneath him. We should be able to talk without being seen." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clark nodded and adjusted their route. As they drove, he found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passenger. Even disheveled from her escape, with her makeup smeared and her hair coming loose from its elaborate styling, Ilara Finch was breathtakingly beautiful. But it was the strength he saw beneath her fear that truly caught his attention. This was a woman who had just made an incredibly brave decision under unimaginable pressure. "I know this is going to sound crazy," Ilara said suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "But I need you to know that what you just did helping me escape, you might have saved my life." Clark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "Vincent Sterling killed my parents," she said quietly, the words hanging in the air between them like a physical presence. 15 years ago, when I was 13. He made it look like an accident, and he's spent the last decade and a half positioning himself to marry me. Today was supposed to be the completion of his plan." The truck swerved slightly as Clark processed her words. He quickly steadied the wheel, his mind racing. "Jesus," he breathed. "Are you certain?" "I found the evidence this morning," Ilara continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Hidden in his private office. Police reports that were never filed, witness statements that disappeared, payments to the coroner who ruled their deaths accidental. He's been planning this for years, getting close to me, earning my trust, making me dependent on him." Clark pulled into the parking lot of Rosewood Cafe, a small, weathered building that looked like it had been serving coffee and comfort food to locals for decades. He turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything Ilara had just told him. "Why would he want to marry you?" he asked finally. "If he killed your parents, why not just—" He stopped, realizing how terrible the question sounded. "Because my parents left me everything," Ilara explained. "Their life insurance, their properties, their business investments. But it's all in a trust that I can only access fully when I marry. Vincent has been my financial advisor since I turned 18. He convinced me it was what my parents would have wanted. He's been controlling my access to my own inheritance while positioning himself to be my husband." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so sinister that Clark felt sick thinking about it. "So if you married him ... everything would become his," Ilara finished. "Every penny my parents worked for, every property they owned, every investment they made for my future. And once we were married, if something happened to me—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Clark looked at this woman, this brave, incredible woman who had just discovered that the man she was about to marry was responsible for the greatest tragedy of her life, and felt a surge of protective anger unlike anything he'd experienced since becoming a father. "We need to call the police," he said immediately. Ilara shook her head sadly. Vincent owns half this town, Clark. The police chief plays golf with him every weekend. The mayor's re-election campaign was funded by Sterling Industries. Even if I could prove what I found this morning, who would believe me? A bride having a nervous breakdown on her wedding day, making wild accusations against one of Thornfield's most respected citizens? She was right, and Clark knew it. In a town like Thornfield, money and influence could make inconvenient truths disappear. Vincent Sterling had clearly been planning this for years, and he wouldn't have left himself vulnerable to simple exposure. "Then what do we do?" Clark asked. "I don't know," Ilara admitted, and for the first time since he'd helped her through that window, she looked truly lost. "I've been so focused on getting away from the wedding that I haven't thought about what comes next. I can't go home. Vincent has keys to my apartment. I can't access my bank accounts without his authorization. I don't even have my purse or my phone." Clark studied her for a moment. This woman who had just lost everything she thought she knew about her life and made another decision that surprised him. "You can stay with me," he said. "At least until we figure out a plan. I have a guest room, and my daughter Maya is spending the weekend with my sister in Oakville. You'll be safe there while we work out what to do next." Ilara stared at him in amazement. "You don't even know me," she said. "Why would you?" "Because 15 minutes ago, you were trapped in a room about to marry the man who killed your parents," Clark interrupted gently. "And because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than being practical." For the first time since he'd seen her at the window, Ilara smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll find a way to repay you for this." "Let's just focus on keeping you safe," Clark replied, starting the truck again. "Everything else can wait." As they drove toward his house, neither of them could have imagined that this moment, a man helping a stranger in distress, would be the beginning of something that would not only expose a killer, but heal two hearts that had been broken in very different ways. Clark's house was a modest 2-story, colonial in the Maplewood Heights neighborhood, a middle-class area where the lawns were well-maintained, but not professionally landscaped, and the cars in the driveways were practical rather than luxurious. As they pulled into his driveway, Ilara felt a sense of relief wash over her. This was exactly the kind of place Vincent would never think to look for her. "It's not much," Clark said as he helped her out of the truck, "but it's safe and quiet. The neighbors are good people who mind their own business." Ilara gathered her wedding dress around her as they walked toward the front door, acutely aware of how ridiculous she must look in this suburban setting. "Right now, this looks like paradise," she said honestly. Inside, the house was clean and comfortable, with the lived-in feeling that comes from being a real home rather than a showpiece. Maya's soccer trophies lined the mantel, school artwork was displayed on the refrigerator, and there were signs everywhere of a father raising a daughter on his own, from the pink backpack hanging by the door to the half-finished homework on the kitchen table. "Let me get you something to change into," Clark said, disappearing upstairs for a moment. He returned with a UCL, a sweatshirt, and a pair of sweatpants. "These will be big on you, but they're clean and comfortable. The bathroom is just down the hall if you want to wash up." 20 minutes later, Ilara emerged from the bathroom, looking like a completely different person. Gone was the elaborate wedding makeup and the perfectly styled hair. In its place was a natural, younger-looking woman whose green eyes seemed brighter, without all the formal trappings. Clark's clothes hung loosely on her smaller frame, but she looked more relaxed than she had all day. "Feel better?" Clark asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Infinitely," Ilara replied, settling onto his couch with a sigh. "I can't remember the last time I felt this normal." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the extraordinary events of the afternoon. Through the living room window, Ilara could see families in neighboring yards, fathers teaching sons to throw baseballs, mothers pushing toddlers on swing sets, teenagers washing cars and driveways. It was such an ordinary Saturday afternoon, yet her entire world had been turned upside down. "Tell me about your parents," Clark said gently. "What were they like?" Elura's expression softened, and for the first time since her escape, she looked genuinely peaceful. "They were amazing," she said. "Dad owned Finch Construction. They built half the houses in this neighborhood, actually. Mom was a nurse at Thornfield General. They weren't wealthy like the Sterlings, but they worked hard and they loved each other fiercely." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping Clark's oversized sweatshirt around her. "They died in a car accident when I was 13. At least, that's what everyone thought. Dad's truck went off Riverside Bridge during a storm. The police said he must have lost control on the wet roads. But you don't think it was an accident anymore," Clark said. "Vincent was their business partner," Elura explained. "Dad had brought him in to help with the financial side of the construction company. What I found in Vincent's office this morning was correspondence between him and some very dangerous people my dad had refused to work with. Dad had discovered that Vincent was using the construction company to launder money for them." Clark set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't take no for an answer," Elura said quietly. "Dad was going to expose Vincent and turn everything over to the FBI, but the night before he was supposed to meet with federal agents, he and Mom died on that bridge. The pieces of the puzzle were becoming clearer, and Clark felt a chill run down his spine. So Vincent eliminated the threat and then positioned himself to take over the business. "More than that," Elura said. "He positioned himself to take over me. After my parents died, Vincent stepped in as my guardian's advisor. He helped arrange my schooling, my housing, my entire life. He made himself indispensable while systematically isolating me from anyone who might have questioned his motives." Clark thought about his own daughter, Maya, and what it would mean for someone to manipulate and control her entire life from such a young age. The protective anger he'd felt earlier intensified. "How did you finally figure it out?" "This morning. I went to his office to borrow his printer because mine was broken. I needed to print my wedding vows," Elura said with bitter irony. "His computer was open to a password-protected folder I'd never seen before. I don't know why, but something made me try my mother's maiden name as the password." She was quiet for a moment, reliving the horror of her discovery. Inside were copies of police reports that had never been filed, witness statements that contradicted the official story, even photos from the accident scene that showed evidence of tampering with Dad's truck. But the worst part was finding my parents' life insurance policies with Vincent listed as the primary beneficiary if anything happened to me after we were married. Clark felt his hands clench into fists. "He's been planning to kill you." "Eventually, yes," Elura said with remarkable composure. "Probably not right away. That would be too suspicious. But a year or two down the line, after the inheritance was safely transferred and everyone had gotten used to us being married." Another tragic accident. The enormity of what she had escaped hit Clark like a physical blow. This wasn't just a woman running from an unhappy marriage. This was someone who had literally escaped with her life. "Elura," he said seriously. "What you did today, trusting your instincts and getting out of there, that took incredible courage." "I was terrified," she admitted. "When I heard him coming up the stairs with the wedding party for photos, I knew it was my last chance. If I went through with the ceremony, I might never get another opportunity to escape. But you took it," Clark pointed out. "Even though you didn't know what would happen next, even though you had no plan, you chose to save yourself." Elura looked at him curiously. "You talk like someone who understands difficult choices." Clark nodded slowly. "Different circumstances, but yeah. 5 years ago, my ex-wife decided she wanted a different life, one that didn't include me or Maya. She tried to take Maya to California with her new boyfriend, claiming I was an unfit father because I worked construction and didn't make enough money. What did you do? I fought for my daughter, Clark said simply. Sold everything I owned to pay for lawyers. Started my own business so I could prove I could provide for her. Learned to braid hair and help with homework and all the things I thought her mother would always be there to do. Ilara studied his face, seeing the same determination that had driven her to climb out of that window. You built a whole new life for her. We built it together, Clark corrected. Maya's the strongest person I know. She handled the divorce better than I did, honestly. She's the one who suggested I start the audio business after she saw how much I enjoyed helping with the school's theater productions. Where is she now? Spending the weekend with my sister in Oakville. Sarah thought Maya needed some girl time away from her old man, Clark said with a fond smile. She'll be back Sunday evening, full of stories about shopping and movies, and whatever other mysterious things females do when men aren't around. Ilara found herself smiling at the obvious love in his voice when he talked about his daughter. You're a good father. I try to be, Clark said. The way I see it, Maya didn't choose to have her mother walk out on us. The least I can do is make sure she knows she's loved and protected. Like you're doing for me, Ilara said softly. Clark met her eyes across the coffee table. Sometimes helping people is just the right thing to do, regardless of the circumstances. They sat in comfortable silence again, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the afternoon was shifting toward evening, and Ilara realized that for the first time in hours, she felt truly safe. Here in this ordinary house with this extraordinary man, she could finally process what had happened and begin to think about what came next. Clark, she said finally, I need you to know that being around me could be dangerous. Vincent has a lot of resources, and when he realizes I'm not just having pre-wedding jitters. Let me worry about that, Clark interrupted gently. Right now, you need to rest and recover from everything you've been through. Tomorrow we can start figuring out how to make sure Vincent Sterling pays for what he did to your parents. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes, not tears of fear or sadness, but of gratitude. After years of being manipulated and controlled, she had found someone who was willing to help her without asking for anything in return. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Clark nodded, understanding that she was thanking him for more than just the rescue. She was thanking him for giving her hope that there were still good people in the world. Sunday morning arrived quietly at Clark's house, with golden sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as he prepared breakfast. Ilara had slept deeply for the first time in months, finally free from the anxiety that had been building toward her wedding day. She found Clark at the stove, making what appeared to be enough pancakes to feed a small army. Maya's favorite, he explained when he saw her questioning look. Old habits die hard. Plus, I figured you might be hungry. You didn't eat much yesterday. Ilara realized he was right. Between her pre-wedding nerves and the shocking discovery in Vincent's office, she hadn't eaten anything substantial in over 24 hours. The smell of pancakes and coffee was making her stomach growl audibly. This is wonderful, she said, settling at his kitchen table. It's been so long since someone cooked for me without being paid to do it. Clark paused in his cooking, studying her face. What was your life like before yesterday? I mean, day to day, what did you do? Ilara considered the question while Clark plated the pancakes. Honestly, I lived in a very beautiful cage. Vincent controlled my schedule, my finances, my social circle. I thought I was an independent woman, but looking back, every major decision in my life was influenced by him. She accepted the plate Clark offered her, appreciating the simple domestic gesture more than he could possibly know. I have a degree in art history from Thornfield College, but I've never had a real job. Vincent convinced me that managing my inheritance was a full-time occupation. I served on charity boards, attended social functions, basically played the role of the perfect socialite fiancé. That sounds incredibly lonely, Clark observed, joining her at the table. It was. Ilara admitted. Vincent systematically removed anyone from my life who might have questioned our relationship. Friends who thought we moved too fast. Family friends who remembered my parents too well. Even professors who encouraged me to pursue graduate school. He always had reasonable explanations for why these people weren't good for me. Clark shook his head in disgust. Classic manipulation tactics. Isolate the victim. Control their resources. Make them dependent on you for everything. You sound like you know something about manipulation, Ilara said carefully. Clark was quiet for a moment, cutting his pancakes with more attention than they required. My ex-wife, Rebecca, was a master at it. Nothing as evil as what Vincent did to you, but she had her own ways of making me feel like I was never good enough, never doing enough, never earning enough. He set down his fork and met Ilara's eyes. For 3 years of marriage, I believed that I was lucky she had chosen me. She was beautiful, came from a wealthy family, had a college degree while I was just a construction worker. She made me feel grateful that she was willing to settle for someone like me. What changed? Ilara asked gently. Maya started talking. Clark said with a sad smile. Not baby talk, real conversation. And I realized that this little person thought I was amazing exactly as I was. She didn't care that I came home dirty from work or that I didn't know the difference between good wine and cheap wine. She just wanted me to read her stories and push her on the swings and teach her to ride her bike. Ilara could see the pain in his eyes as he continued. Rebecca saw Maya's attachment to me as a threat to her control. She started making comments about how I was turning our daughter against her, how Maya was becoming too much of a daddy's girl. When Maya was 5, Rebecca announced she was leaving for California with her new boyfriend and wanted to take Maya with her. That must have been terrifying, Ilara said. It was the wake-up call I needed, Clark replied. I realized that everything Rebecca had told me about myself was wrong. I wasn't lucky to have her, Maya was lucky to have me. I was a good father, a hard worker, and a decent man. Rebecca's opinion of me said more about her than it did about me. Ilara nodded, understanding the parallel he was drawing. Like Vincent's opinion of me said more about his plans than my worth. My worth. Exactly, Clark said. The custody battle was brutal. Rebecca hired expensive lawyers and tried to paint me as an unstable, uneducated father who couldn't provide properly for Maya. But I had documentation of every school event I'd attended, every doctor's appointment I'd handled, every bedtime story I'd read. And Maya? Maya was old enough to express her preference to the family court judge, Clark said proudly. She told the judge that while she loved her mother, she felt safest and happiest with me. The judge awarded me primary custody, and Rebecca moved to California without her. Ilara felt a surge of admiration for this man who had fought so hard for his daughter. How did you manage after that? Raising a 5-year-old on your own while working construction? Clark smiled, and Ilara could see how the memory brought him joy, even amidst the pain. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every challenge. I had to learn to manage her schedule around job sites, pack lunches that weren't just peanut butter sandwiches, and figure out how to do ponytails that didn't look like they'd been assembled by a construction worker. But you figured it out, Ilara said. Maya and I figured it out together, Clark corrected. She was incredibly patient with me when I burned dinner or forgot to sign permission slips. And she started coming to job sites with me on school holidays. That's actually how I got interested in audio work. How so? One of my construction jobs was renovating a community theater, Clark explained. Maya was fascinated by the sound booth, and the technical director let her help with some of the simpler equipment. She had such a natural ear for it that he suggested I consider learning audio engineering as a side business. Ilara could hear the pride in his voice as he continued. Within 2 years, I was doing sound for school productions, community events, and eventually weddings like yours. The audio business grew enough that I could leave construction and have more flexible hours to spend with Maya. So she changed your entire career path, Ilara said with wonder. She changed my entire life, Clark said simply. Maya taught me that being needed by someone who truly loves you is one of the greatest gifts in the world. Everything I've built since the divorce has been about creating a life where she feels secure and valued. Ilara found herself thinking about her own parents, how they had worked to build a life that would provide security for her future. My parents were like that, she said softly. Everything they did was focused on making sure I would be okay if something happened to them. Tell me more about them, Clark encouraged. Dad started Finch Construction when I was born because he wanted to build something lasting for our family, Ilara said, her voice warming with memory. Mom worked night shifts at the hospital so she could be home with me during the day. They never had much money, but they made every day feel special. She smiled, lost in recollection. Mom used to let me help her bake cookies for Dad's construction crews. She said that feeding people was one of the most important ways to show you cared about them. And Dad would bring me scraps of wood from job sites so we could build birdhouses together in the garage. They sound like wonderful people, Clark said. They were, Ilara agreed. After they died, I kept expecting to wake up and find out it was all a nightmare. Vincent stepped in so quickly to help with arrangements and decisions that I didn't have time to process what I'd lost. He made everything seem manageable when I felt completely overwhelmed. Clark could see the pain in her eyes as she continued. I think that's when the manipulation really began. Vincent positioned himself as my protector and guide when I was too young and traumatized to recognize that he was actually the source of my trauma. Have you had any contact with other family members over the years? Clark asked. Ilara shook her head sadly. Vincent convinced me that my extended family was only interested in my inheritance. He showed me legal documents that proved my parents had specifically chosen him as my financial guardian rather than trusting their siblings. I believed him because I wanted to believe that my parents had left me in good hands. But now you know better, Clark said. Now I know that Vincent probably forged those documents, Ilara said with bitter clarity. Along with everything else he's manipulated about my life. They sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their shared stories. Clark found himself marveling at Ilara's strength. She had survived 15 years of psychological manipulation and still had the courage to escape when she discovered the truth. What do you want your life to look like now? He asked finally. I mean, once we figure out how to deal with Vincent, what would make you happy? Ilara considered the question seriously. I want to finish what my parents started, she said finally. I want to use my inheritance the way they intended, to build something meaningful, to help people. And I want to surround myself with people who care about me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. She looked at Clark directly. People like you and Maya. Clark felt something shift in his chest at her words. Over the past 24 hours, this remarkable woman had become more than just someone he was helping. She was becoming someone he genuinely cared about. Maya's going to love you, he said with certainty. She has excellent instincts about people. When will I meet her? Ilara asked. Clark glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. Actually, my sister Sarah is bringing her home this afternoon. If you're ready to meet a very curious 10-year-old who's going to have about 1,000 questions for you. Ilara smiled, the first completely carefree smile Clark had seen from her. I can't wait. Sarah Chun pulled into Clark's driveway at exactly 3 o'clock, her punctuality as reliable as clockwork. Through the living room window, Ilara watched. A woman who shared Clark's warm brown eyes emerged from a silver sedan, followed by an energetic girl with long dark hair and grass stains on her soccer jersey. That's Maya, Clark said, moving to stand beside Ilara at the window. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he watched his daughter grab her overnight bag and race toward the front door. Fair warning, she's going to want to know everything about you within the first 5 minutes. Ilara felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She'd had very little experience with children over the past 15 years, and Maya was clearly the most important person in Clark's world. If this didn't go well. "Dad," Maya's voice carried through the house as she burst through the front door. "Aunt Sarah let me drive the golf cart at the resort, and I only hit one tree, and it wasn't even a big tree, and..." She stopped mid-sentence when she spotted Ilara standing in the living room. Maya looked from her father to Ilara and back. Again, her sharp eyes taking in the UCL, a sweatshirt that was obviously too big for the stranger in their house. "Dad, why is there a lady wearing your clothes in our living room?" Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Maya, equally curious but more diplomatic in her observation. "Clark, everything okay here?" Clark placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Maya, I'd like you to meet Ilara. She's a friend who needed a safe place to stay for a few days." "Ilara, this is Maya, and my sister Sarah." Maya stepped forward with the confidence that only children possess, extending her hand for a formal handshake. "Nice to meet you, Ilara. Are you running away from something?" "Because Dad only lets people wear his clothes when they're running away from something or when their washing machine is broken." "Maya," Clark warned gently, but Ilara laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd experienced in months. "You're very perceptive, Maya," Ilara said, shaking the girl's hand seriously. "I am running away from something, actually. Something pretty scary." Maya's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Are you okay? Do you need us to call the police?" "Dad's really good at protecting people." Sarah stepped into the living room, clearly intrigued by this development. "Clark, when you said you might not be able to make dinner tonight, I thought you meant you had a work emergency." "It's complicated, Sarah," Clark said. "But Ilara needed help, and ... And Dad helped because that's what Dad does," Maya finished matter-of-factly. She turned back to Ilara with undisguised curiosity. "What were you running away from? Was someone trying to hurt you?" Ilara looked at Clark, unsure how much to share with a 10-year-old. He nodded encouragingly, trusting her judgment. "Someone I thought I could trust turned out to be dangerous," Ilara explained carefully. "I found out some things about him that scared me, so I left." Maya nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. "Like when we found out that Mr. Peterson next door was the one stealing packages from people's porches. Sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be." "Exactly like that," Ilara agreed. Impressed by Maya's maturity, Sarah studied Ilara with the assessing gaze of someone who had spent years watching her brother's interactions with women. "Are you planning to stay here long?" "Just until I figure out what to do next," Ilara replied honestly. "Your brother has been incredibly kind to help a complete stranger." "She's not a stranger anymore," Maya announced. "She's our friend, right, Dad?" Clark felt warmth spread through his chest at his daughter's easy acceptance. "Right, Maya." "Maya." "Good," Maya said with satisfaction. "Do you like soccer, Ilara?" "Because I have practice Tuesday and Thursday and games on Saturday. And Dad always comes, but sometimes he looks bored when we're just passing drills." "I don't look bored," Clark protested. "You check your phone," Maya countered. "I have never." 3 times last Thursday," Maya said with the precision of a court stenographer. Sarah laughed at the familiar banter between her brother and niece. "Maya, why don't you show Ilara your room while I talk to your dad for a minute?" Maya brightened at the suggestion. "Want to see my soccer trophies and my rock collection? And the birdhouse Dad and I built last summer?" Ilara glanced at Clark, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love to see everything," she told Maya, allowing herself to be led upstairs by an enthusiastic tour guide. Once they were alone, Sarah turned to her brother with raised eyebrows. "Clark Chen, what exactly is going on here? And don't give me some vague story about helping a friend. I can see the way you're looking at her." Clark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah recognized as his stress response. "It's complicated, Sarah. Really complicated. Try me." Clark gave his sister an abbreviated version of the past 24 hours, watching her expression shift from curiosity to concern to outright alarm. "Clark, you're telling me you helped someone escape from their wedding, and now you're harboring them in your house?" Sarah said when he finished. "What if this Vincent person comes looking for her?" "Then we'll deal with it," Clark replied firmly. "We?" Sarah studied her brother's face carefully. "Clark, please tell me you're not developing feelings for a woman you met yesterday, who's running from a potentially dangerous situation." "It's not about feelings," Clark said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. "It's about doing what's right." Upstairs, they could hear Maya's animated voice explaining the intricacies of her rock collection to Ilara, who was asking appropriately interested questions about each specimen. "She's good with Maya," Sarah observed. "Maya likes her," Clark confirmed. "And you know how good Maya is at reading people." Sarah sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her brother's jaw that meant he'd made up his mind about something. "Just promise me you'll be careful, both of you. If this Vincent person is as dangerous as she says ... "I know," Clark said. "But Sarah, you should have seen her yesterday. She was terrified, but so brave. And when she told me what he did to her..." Parents ... double quotes. He shook his head. "I couldn't walk away from that." Before Sarah could respond, Maya and Ilara returned downstairs, Maya chattering about the various projects she and her father had worked on together. "Dad, can Ilara stay for dinner?" Maya asked. "I want to show her how we make pizza on Sunday nights." Ilara looked uncertain. "I don't want to impose on family time ... "You're not imposing," Clark said quickly. "Besides, Maya takes her pizza very seriously. It would be an honor for you to be included in the Chun family pizza tradition." "The Chun family pizza tradition," Maya repeated importantly, "involves letting everyone choose their own toppings and then arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza." "It absolutely does not," Clark said with mock seriousness. "It absolutely does," Maya countered. Ilara found herself laughing again at their easy banter. "What's your position on pineapple pizza?" Maya asked her. "I think," Ilara said diplomatically, "that pizza is like families. It comes in all different varieties. And they're all perfect in their own way." Maya beamed at this answer. "See, Dad? Ilara gets it." Sarah watched this interaction with growing understanding. Her brother wasn't just helping this woman, he was falling for her. And Maya, with her uncanny ability to sense when people genuinely cared about her father, was clearly already planning to adopt Ilara into their family circle. "Well," Sarah said finally, "I guess I should stay for dinner too. Someone needs to supervise this pizza situation and make sure you don't scare Ilara away with your anti-pineapple propaganda." As the afternoon shifted into evening, Ilara found herself drawn into the warm chaos of the Chun family's Sunday routine. Maya insisted on teaching her the proper way to stretch pizza dough. Clark provided running commentary on everyone's topping choices, and Sarah shared embarrassing stories about Clark's teenage years. For the first time in years, Ilara felt like she was part of a real family, not the artificial construct Vincent had created around her, but the genuine love and connection she remembered from her childhood with her parents. "This is wonderful," she told Clark quietly as they watched Maya explain pizza geometry to Sarah. "Maya has that effect on people," Clark replied. "She makes everything better just by being herself." "It's not just Maya," Ilara said, meeting his eyes. "It's all of you. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be somewhere I belonged." Clark felt something tighten in his chest at her words. In just 24 hours, this extraordinary woman had become an integral part of his thoughts, his plans, his hopes for the future. He was falling for her, and judging by the way she was looking at him, the feeling might be mutual. But even as happiness bloomed between them, Clark couldn't shake the awareness that their peaceful Sunday evening existed in a bubble that Vincent Sterling would eventually try to burst. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out how to protect what they were building, while ensuring that justice was finally served for Ilara's parents. For tonight, though, they had pizza and laughter, and the beginning of something that felt like love. Following week settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Clark would leave for work each morning while Maya was at school, handling his regular clients while Ilara spent her days researching legal options and organizing the evidence she'd found in Vincent's office. By the time Maya returned from school, Ilara would be waiting with homework help and after-school snacks, slipping seamlessly into a role that felt both foreign and completely right. Clark found himself rushing home each evening, eager to hear about Maya's day and to see Ilara's smile when he walked through the door. She had a way of making their modest house feel warmer, more complete. Whether she was helping Maya with a science project at the kitchen table or reading quietly in the living room while Maya practiced piano, Ilara seemed to belong in their life in a way that amazed him. "She makes you happy, Dad," Maya observed. On Thursday evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Ilara was upstairs taking a phone call from the private investigator she'd hired to help build a case against Vincent. "What makes you say that?" Clark asked, though he could feel the truth of his daughter's words in the lightness that had settled in his chest over the past week. "You smile more," Maya said matter-of-factly, loading plates into the dishwasher. "And you hum when you're cooking. Now, you only used to do that when Mom first left and you were trying really hard to make everything seem normal." Clark paused in his wiping of the counter, struck by his daughter's perception. "Is that okay with you, me being happy?" Maya rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience that only 10-year-olds could muster. "Dad, of course it's okay. I want you to be happy. And Ilara's really nice, and she actually listens when I talk about soccer instead of just pretending to pay attention." "I always listen when you talk about soccer," Clark protested. "You listen with your ears," Maya clarified, "but Ilara listens with her whole face. Like when I told her about the penalty kick I made last week, she got almost as excited as I did." Clark smiled, remembering Ilara's genuine enthusiasm as Maya had recounted her athletic triumph. "She does get excited about things that matter to you. Plus she makes really good pancakes," Maya added pragmatically. "Almost as good as yours, but don't tell her I said that." Their conversation was interrupted by Ilara returning downstairs, her expression thoughtful but determined. "Good news," she announced. The private investigator found 2 witnesses from 15 years ago who were never interviewed by the police. "People who saw Vincent near the bridge the night my parents died." Clark felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. "That's incredible, Ilara. What's the next step?" "He's arranging for them to give statements to a federal prosecutor in Springfield," Ilara explained, settling at the kitchen table. "Someone outside of Thornfield's jurisdiction who won't be influenced by Vincent's connections." Maya looked between the adults, sensing the gravity of the conversation. "Are you going to be able to send the bad man to jail?" Ilara reached over and smoothed Maya's hair gently. "I hope so, sweetheart. It might take some time, but I think we're finally going to get justice for my parents." "Good," Maya said with fierce satisfaction. "Bad people should go to jail." Later that evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Clark and Ilara found themselves on the front porch, sharing a beer and watching the quiet suburban street settle into nighttime calm. The October air was crisp but not yet cold, and Ilara had wrapped herself in one of Clark's hoodies, a sight that made his heart skip in ways he was still getting used to. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Ilara admitted quietly. "This past week has been so peaceful, so normal. It feels too good to be real." Clark studied her profile in the porch light, noting the way she'd relaxed over the past few days. The constant tension she'd carried during her first weekend with them had gradually melted away, replaced by something that looked like genuine contentment. "Maybe this is real," he suggested. Maybe you deserve to have peaceful and normal. Do you think Vincent has just given up? Ilara asked. It's been over a week since the wedding. I keep expecting him to come pounding on your door. Clark had been wondering the same thing, but he'd chosen to focus on building a case rather than worrying about Vincent's silence. My guess is he's trying to control the narrative. Make it seem like you had some kind of breakdown rather than admitting you discovered his secret. The private investigator said Vincent filed a missing person report claiming I'm mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to myself, Ilara confirmed. He's painting himself as the concerned fiancé trying to get help for his troubled bride. But that actually works in our favor, Clark pointed out. If he's claiming you're missing and mentally unstable, he can't also be publicly searching for you. It would contradict his story. Ilara nodded, then turned to face Clark directly. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay, are you having second thoughts about any of this? About helping me, about letting me stay here, about... She gestured between them. Whatever this is that's happening between us. Clark set down his beer and turned to face her fully. Ilara, the only thing I'm having second thoughts about is whether I'm being fair to you. What do you mean? I mean that a week ago you escaped from a nightmare, Clark said carefully. You discovered that the man you were about to marry killed your parents and planned to kill you. You've been manipulated and controlled for 15 years. The last thing you need is to feel pressured into another relationship just because I helped you get away. Ilara was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. Clark, do you know what the difference is between what I felt with Vincent and what I feel with you? He shook his head, not trusting his voice. With Vincent, I always felt like I was performing. Like I had to be the perfect fiancée, the grateful heiress, the woman he wanted me to be. Every conversation, every touch, every moment felt calculated. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. With you, I feel like myself. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like the person I was before my parents died. Clark squeezed her hand gently. You never have to be anyone but yourself here. I know, Ilara said softly. That's why I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the night air between them, simple and honest and transformative. Clark felt his heart race as he processed what she'd just said. Not that she was grateful to him, not that she was confused by his kindness, but that she was falling in love with him. Ilara, he said quietly, I'm falling in love with you too. She smiled. Then, the radiant smile he'd come to treasure over the past week. So what do we do about that? We take it one day at a time, Clark said, leaning closer to her. We build something real together. And we make sure Vincent Sterling pays for what he did to your family. When Clark kissed her, it was with the gentleness of someone who understood that trust was a precious gift, and the passion of someone who had found something worth fighting for. Ilara melted into the kiss, feeling safer and more loved than she had since. She was 13 years old. They were so absorbed in each other that neither of them noticed the dark sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the telephoto lens that had captured their entire conversation. Inside the car, Vincent Sterling's private investigator lowered his camera and reached for his phone. He had what his client had been waiting for, proof of where Ilara Finch had been hiding, and evidence that she was clearly not suffering from the mental breakdown Vincent had described to the authorities. The peaceful week was about to come to an end. Friday morning shattered the illusion of safety with a single phone call. Clark was loading his equipment truck for a corporate event when his phone rang. The caller ID showing his sister Sarah's number. Clark, you need to see the news, Sarah said without preamble, her voice tight with worry. Channel 6 right now. Clark hurried inside where Ilara was helping Maya pack her lunch for school. The three of them gathered around the small television in the kitchen as Clark found the local news station. Missing Thornfield socialite Ilara Finch has been located safe. According to sources close to the investigation, the anchor was saying. Behind her, the screen displayed a photo of Ilara from her engagement announcement, followed by a grainy telephoto shot of her and Clark kissing on his porch the night before. Miss Finch, who disappeared hours before her scheduled wedding to prominent businessman Vincent Sterling, has apparently been staying with Clark Finn, a local audio technician, the reporter continued. Sterling's representatives have issued a statement expressing relief that his fiancée has been found safe, while raising concerns about her mental state and the circumstances of her disappearance. Maya looked up at Ilara with wide eyes. "You're on TV." Ilara felt the familiar cold grip of fear return to her stomach. "Vincent found me," she whispered. The news report continued with a brief interview with Vincent himself, standing outside Willowbrook Estate, looking every inch the concerned fiancé. "I'm just grateful that Ilara is safe," he said with perfect sincerity. "She's been under tremendous stress lately, and I hope she can get the help she needs. I want everyone to know that despite this difficult situation, I'm committed to supporting her recovery." "Turn it off," Clark said sharply. But the damage was already done. Vincent had successfully reframed the narrative. Ilara wasn't a brave woman who had escaped from her parents' killer. She was a mentally unstable runaway who had been found with another man. Clark's phone began ringing immediately. First his sister, then his business clients, then numbers he didn't recognize. Within an hour, there were news vans parked outside his house and reporters knocking on his door. "Maya, go pack a bag," Clark instructed his daughter calmly. "You're going to stay with Aunt Sarah until this settles down." "But I don't want to leave," Maya protested. "What about Ilara? What if the reporters are mean to her?" Ilara knelt down to Maya's level, forcing a reassuring smile. "The reporters aren't going to be mean, sweetheart. They're just curious. But your dad is right. You'll be safer and more comfortable at your aunt's house." Maya looked between the adults, clearly understanding that something serious was happening. "Are you going to be okay? Are you and Dad going to be okay?" "We're going to be fine," Ilara promised, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. After Sarah picked up Maya, whisking her away from the media circus, Clark and Ilara found themselves trapped in the house, unable to leave without facing a barrage of cameras and questions. Clark had called to cancel his afternoon event, and his phone continued to ring with clients either expressing concern or, in a few uncomfortable cases, questioning whether they wanted to continue working with someone involved in such a scandal. "I should leave," Ilara said as they watched more news vans arrive through the living room window. "This is destroying your life, Clark. Your business, your reputation, Maya's privacy." "No," Clark said firmly. "Absolutely not. This is exactly what Vincent wants, to isolate you again, to make you feel like you have nowhere to go. But look what I've brought into your life." Ilara gestured toward the circus outside. "A week ago, you were a single dad with a quiet business and a normal life. Now you're front page news because you helped the wrong person." Clark turned away from the window and took her hands in his. "Ilara, I didn't help the wrong person. I helped exactly the right person. And if Vincent Sterling thinks he can intimidate me with some news coverage and gossip, he clearly doesn't understand what he's dealing with." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, not the aggressive pounding of reporters, but a calm, professional rap. Clark peered through the peephole to see a woman in a business suit holding official-looking credentials. "Agent Jennifer Torres, FBI," she announced when Clark opened the door. "I'd like to speak with Miss Finch about Vincent Sterling." Hope and fear warred in Ilara's chest as she joined Clark at the door. "Has something happened with the investigation?" Agent Torres glanced meaningfully at the media crowd. "May I come in?" This isn't a conversation for the front porch. Once inside, Agent Torres got straight to business. "Miss Finch, we've been investigating Sterling Industries for money laundering and racketeering for the past 6 months. When your private investigator contacted federal prosecutors about your parents' case, it provided crucial pieces we needed for our larger investigation. Ilara felt a surge of hope. So you believe me? About Vincent killing my parents? We believe the evidence, Torres replied carefully. And the evidence suggests that your parents' death was indeed murder, orchestrated to prevent them from exposing Sterling's criminal activities. Clark felt relief wash over him. Finally, someone with real authority was taking Ilara's story seriously. However, Torres continued, Sterling's media campaign has created complications. By painting you as mentally unstable and suggesting that you've been kidnapped or coerced by Mr. Finn, he's provided himself with a defense strategy if you try to testify against him. What kind of defense strategy? Clark asked. He can claim that any accusations you make are the product of mental illness or manipulation by your alleged captor, Torres explained. It's a classic discrediting tactic. Ilara felt the walls closing in again. So even with evidence, Vincent can still win by destroying my credibility? Not necessarily, Torres said. But it means we need to be strategic about how we proceed. The fact that you're clearly not being held against your will helps our case. And Mr. Finn's background, military veteran, successful business owner, devoted father, doesn't fit the profile of someone who would kidnap and manipulate a vulnerable woman. Clark's stomach dropped. Agent Torres, I need to clarify something. I was never in the military. Torres checked her notes with a frown. The background check we ran showed. You're thinking of someone else, Clark interrupted. I've worked construction and now audio services, but I've never served in the military. Agent Torres made a note, but didn't seem overly concerned. Not a problem. The point is, your background supports the narrative that Miss Finch came to you voluntarily for help. Outside, the noise from the media crowd was growing louder. Someone had set up a camera with a long lens aimed directly at Clark's living room. Window, what do we do now? Ilara asked. Now we build an unshakable case, Torres replied. We gather evidence that not only proves Sterling killed your parents, but shows a pattern of criminal behavior that goes back years. And we make sure that when we arrest him, there's no question about your mental state or your credibility. How long will that take? Clark asked. Weeks, possibly months, Torres admitted. Sterling has spent 15 years covering his tracks. We need to be thorough. After Agent Torres left, Clark and Ilara sat in his living room, processing the day's developments. The initial hope of federal involvement was tempered by the reality that Vincent's media strategy was already working. Clark, Ilara said quietly, I need you to really think about what staying with me means. This isn't going to get easier, it's going to get worse. Vincent has resources, connections, and a 15-year head start on controlling this narrative. Clark looked at the woman he loved, saw the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, and made a decision that would define the rest of their lives together. Ilara, he said, pulling her close, I don't care if it takes 15 years to clear your name and put Vincent in prison. I don't care if every client I have cancels their contracts. I don't care if the entire town of Thornfield thinks I'm crazy for believing in you. He cupped her face in his hands, meeting her eyes directly. I love you. I believe in you. And I'm not going anywhere. Outside, cameras continued to flash and reporters continued to speculate. But inside Clark's house, two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness held on to the hope that love and truth would ultimately prevail. They had no idea that Vincent Sterling was already planning his next move, one that would test their commitment in ways they couldn't imagine. 3 weeks after the media storm began, Clark was starting to understand the true cost of standing by Ilara. His business had lost 60% of its clients. Maya was being harassed at school by classmates who had seen the news coverage, and the constant scrutiny was wearing on all of them. Even worse, Vincent Sterling had hired a team of private investigators who seemed to document their every move. The The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Clark received a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Finn? This is Dr. Patricia Wells from Thornfield Elementary. I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident involving Maya." Clark's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident? Is she hurt?" "She's not physically injured, but she's very upset. There was a confrontation with some other students about the situation with Miss Finch. I think it's best if we discuss this in person." Clark found Maya in the principal's office, her face red and tear-streaked, her school uniform disheveled. She launched herself into his arms the moment she saw him. "Dad, they said horrible things about Alara," Maya sobbed. "They said she was crazy and that you were stupid for believing her lies. And when I told them they were wrong, Becky Morrison said that maybe you were crazy too, and that's why Mom left us." Clark felt his heart shatter as he held his daughter, feeling her small body shake with sobs. Dr. Wells explained that the confrontation had escalated when Maya pushed Becky Morrison after the girl suggested that Alara was probably a criminal. 2. Maya's never been in a physical altercation before, Dr. Wells said carefully. She's normally one of our most well-behaved students, but she seems to be under considerable stress lately. The drive home was silent except for Maya's occasional sniffles. Clark's mind raced as he tried to figure out how to protect his daughter from a situation that seemed to be spiraling out of control. Alara was waiting for them when they arrived home, and Maya ran straight to her, seeking comfort in the woman who had become such an important part of their lives. "What happened, sweetheart?" Alara asked gently, smoothing Maya's hair. Through hiccuping sobs, Maya recounted the day's events. Alara's face grew pale as she realized the extent to which the media attention was affecting the child she'd grown to love. "Maya, why don't you go upstairs and start your homework?" Clark suggested. "Alara and I need to talk." Once Maya was out of earshot, Clark turned to Alara with anguish written all over his face. "This has to stop," he said quietly. "I can't watch Maya suffer because of my decision to help you." "I know," Alara whispered, her own heart breaking. "I've been thinking the same thing. Maybe it's time for me to leave, Clark. Go somewhere far away until the FBI finishes their investigation." "That's not what I meant," Clark said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Vincent is the problem here, not you." "But Vincent isn't going anywhere," Alara pointed out. "He's going to keep escalating this until you lose everything, your business. Maya's sense of security, maybe even custody if he can convince people you're an unfit parent." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the window, Clark could see 2 official-looking men in suits. His stomach sank as he recognized the type Child Services workers. "Mr. Finn? I'm James Patterson from Child Protective Services. We've received some concerning reports about your home environment, and we need to conduct a welfare check." Clark felt the world tilt beneath his feet. This was Vincent's masterstroke, using the system designed to protect children as a weapon against the man who had dared to help his intended victim. The next hour was a nightmare of questions, inspections, and barely veiled accusations. Social workers were professional but thorough, documenting everything from the contents of Clark's refrigerator to Maya's emotional state. "Maya seems very attached to Miss Finch," Patterson observed. "How long has she been living here?" "She's not living here," Clark corrected. "She's staying here temporarily while dealing with a difficult situation." "And what exactly is your relationship with Miss Finch?" Clark chose his words carefully, aware that everything he said could be used against him later. "We're friends. I helped her when she needed assistance, and we've grown close over the past few weeks." After the social workers left, promising to file their report within 48 hours, Clark sank onto his couch with his head in his hands. Alara sat beside him, her own face pale with guilt and fear. "They're going to recommend removing Maya from the home," Clark said numbly. "I could see it in their eyes." Vincent has probably provided them with a whole file of evidence about my unstable living situation and questionable judgment. This is my fault, Ilara said, tears streaming down her face. I brought this poison into your lives. I should. Never have. Don't, Clark interrupted sharply. Don't you dare blame yourself for Vincent's actions. But even as he said the words, Clark couldn't shake the growing certainty that choosing to help Ilara might cost him the most important thing in his world, his daughter. After Maya had gone to bed, Clark stood in his backyard staring up at the stars, trying to figure out how to protect everyone he loved. Ilara found him there, wrapping her arms around him from behind. I've made a decision, she said quietly. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. There's a safe house the FBI arranged in another state. I'll stay there until the investigation is complete. Clark turned in her arms, his heart breaking at the thought of losing her. Ilara, no, we can fight this. We can. Look me in the eyes and tell me you're not terrified of losing Maya, Ilara challenged. Tell me that if Child Services decides I'm a danger to her stability, you won't choose her over me. Clark opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because the terrible truth was that if forced to choose between protecting Maya and protecting Ilara, he would choose his daughter. He had to choose his daughter. I thought so, Ilara said sadly, seeing the answer in his silence. Clark, I love Maya, but I won't be the reason you lose her. And I won't be the reason you face Vincent alone, Clark replied, pulling her closer. There has to be another way. Maybe there is, Ilara said, but I can't see it right now. All I can see is that everyone I care about gets hurt when they try to help me. They held each other in the darkness, both knowing that the decision had already been made. Vincent Sterling's psychological warfare was working exactly as he'd planned. He was isolating Ilara again, forcing her to choose between love and safety. Inside the house, Maya lay awake in her bed, having heard enough of their conversation to understand that Ilara was leaving. The 10-year-old made her own decision in that moment. If the adults couldn't figure out how to fight back against the bad man who was trying to destroy their family, then maybe it was time for her to take action herself. As Clark and Ilara struggled with their impossible choice, none of them realized that Maya Chun was about to become an unlikely hero in the battle against Vincent Sterling. Maya Chun had always been an observant child, but the past 3 weeks had turned her into a master detective. While the adults around her struggled with legal proceedings and media manipulation, Maya had been conducting her own investigation using the tools available to any 10-year-old in the digital age: her school computer, her friends' older sisters, smartphone, and a determination that would have impressed professional investigators. The morning Ilara was supposed to leave for the FBI safe house, Maya put her plan into action. Dad, I forgot my science project at school, she announced over breakfast. Can we stop by before you take me to Aunt Sarah's? Clark, who was barely holding himself together at the thought of Ilara leaving, nodded absently. He'd already called Sarah to arrange an extended stay for Maya while he figured out how to navigate the Child Services investigation and Ilara's departure. At Thornfield Elementary, Maya led Clark to her classroom where she'd supposedly left her project. But instead of retrieving schoolwork, Maya sat down at the computer station and began typing with purpose. Maya, what are you doing? Clark asked, confused. Saving our family, Maya replied with the matter-of-fact tone she used when explaining obvious things to adults. Dad, did you know that Mr. Sterling has been watching our house? Clark felt his blood chill. What do you mean watching our house? Maya pulled up a social media account she'd created under a fake name, designed to look like a typical neighborhood watch page. Look, she said, pointing to a series of photos she'd taken with her friend's phone over the past 2 weeks. Same. Black car, different days, always parked where they can see our front door. And look at this guy. The images were grainy but clear enough to show a man with a telephoto lens camera, consistently positioned to photograph anyone entering or leaving Clark's house. "Maya, how did you?" Clark began, but his daughter wasn't finished. "There's more," she said, clicking to another folder. "Remember when you thought someone was going through our garbage? I set up my tablet to record the backyard at night." The video showed a different man systematically photographing the contents of their trash bags by flashlight. Clark stared at his daughter in amazement. "Maya, this is incredible evidence, but why didn't you tell me?" "Because you and Ilara have been so sad and scared that I didn't think you'd believe me," Maya said simply. "But I emailed everything to Agent Torres this morning from my school account. She's coming here in 20 minutes. As if summoned by Maya's words, Agent Torres appeared in the classroom doorway, her expression a mixture of professional interest and genuine surprise. "Miss Chun," she said, addressing Maya with the respect due to a fellow investigator, "your email was very thorough. May I see the evidence you've gathered?" For the next hour, Maya walked Agent Torres and Clark through her documentation of Vincent's surveillance operation. She'd photographed license plates, recorded times and dates, and even managed to get a clear picture of one investigator's face when he'd gotten careless near the playground. "This is harassment and illegal surveillance," Torres said, taking notes. Rapidly, "Mr. Finn, with this evidence, we can get restraining orders against these individuals and potentially file charges against Sterling for witness intimidation." Clark looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Maya, this was incredibly brave, but it was also dangerous. If these men had realized what you were doing—" "Dad," Maya interrupted, "they were hurting you and Ilara. They were trying to make you choose between the person you love and me. That's not fair, and it's not right." Agent Torres studied Maya carefully. "Miss Chun, would you be willing to give a formal statement about what you've observed? Your testimony could be crucial in establishing a pattern of intimidation and manipulation." Maya nodded solemnly. "Will it help put the bad man in jail?" "It will definitely help," Torres confirmed. An hour later, they were back at Clark's house where Ilara was packing her few belongings with tears streaming down her face. She looked up when they entered, clearly expecting to say goodbye. "Don't pack," Maya announced. "You're not leaving." "Maya, sweetie, I have to," Ilara began. "No, you don't," Maya interrupted, pulling out her tablet to show Ilara the evidence she'd gathered. "The bad man was cheating. He was watching us and taking pictures and going through our garbage, but I caught him." As Ilara looked through Maya's documentation, her expression shifted from despair to amazement to fierce determination. "Maya, this is incredible. You've proven that Vincent has been orchestrating this entire campaign. The surveillance explains how they knew exactly when to call child services," Clark realized. "They've been documenting our daily routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." Agent Torres nodded. "And illegal surveillance automatically invalidates any evidence they might have gathered. Plus, it demonstrates that Sterling's claims about Miss Finch's mental state are part of a calculated harassment campaign rather than genuine concern." Maya looked between the adults, clearly pleased with herself. "So Ilara can stay?" "Maya," Ilara said, kneeling to the child's level, "what you did was incredibly brave and smart. But there might still be dangers. There are always dangers," Maya said with 10-year-old wisdom. "But you told me that families face dangers together. We're a family now, right?" Clark felt his heart swell as he looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who had refused to let fear win, who had fought for their family with intelligence and courage. "Yes," he said firmly, "we're a family." Agent Torres smiled at the scene before her. "Well, now that that's settled, let me share some more good news. The witnesses your private investigator found have given formal statements, and we found additional evidence of Sterling's money laundering operation. We're planning to arrest him within 48 hours. Ilara felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in weeks. "What about the media campaign? The public perception?" Funny thing about that, Torres replied. When we release the information about Sterling's surveillance operation and the evidence of your parents' murder, public sympathy tends to shift pretty quickly. The story changes from runaway bride with mental health issues to brave woman. Exposes parents' killer. That afternoon, Clark called Sarah to explain that Maya wouldn't be staying with her after all. His sister listened to the entire story with growing amazement. You're telling me that my 10-year-old niece single-handedly exposed a criminal surveillance operation? Sarah asked. She learned it from watching detective shows, Maya explained when Sarah arrived to hear the story in person. They always say you have to document everything and look for patterns. Sarah hugged her niece tightly. Maya Chun, you are absolutely brilliant. I know, Maya said matter-of-factly. But I couldn't let them break up my family. That evening, as news of Vincent Sterling's impending arrest began to leak to the media, Clark and Alara found themselves back on the front porch where they'd first admitted their feelings for each other. This time, Maya was curled up between them, exhausted from her day of playing detective. I can't believe she did all that, Alara said softly, stroking Maya's hair as the child dozed against her shoulder. She gets that determination from her mother, Clark said, then paused. Her real mother. Not Rebecca, you. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. Clark, marry me, he said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could second-guess them. I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for a month. I know we're in the middle of a legal nightmare. But marry me anyway. Alara stared at him, her heart racing. Clark, I love you, he continued, his voice urgent and sincere. Maya loves you. You love us. We're already a family in every way that matters. And after everything Vincent put you through, after all, the manipulation and control, I want you to choose this. Choose us. Choose to build something real and honest and beautiful. Maya stirred in Alara's arms, blinking sleepily. Are you proposing to Alara, Dad? I am, Clark confirmed, looking at his daughter. Is that okay with you? Maya sat up, suddenly wide awake. Are you going to give her a ring? Because Mrs. Peterson at school says you always need a ring for a proper proposal. Clark laughed, realizing he was getting relationship advice from a 10-year-old. I don't have a ring, Maya. I do, Maya said, sliding off the porch swing and running into the house. She returned moments later with a small jewelry box. It was my grandmother's ring. Aunt Sarah gave it to me when I turned 8 and said I should save it for someone special. Clark opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful vintage diamond ring, his mother's engagement ring, which he'd given to Sarah for safekeeping years ago. Maya, are you sure? He asked. Alara is special, Maya said simply. And she's going to be my mom now, right? Alara felt tears streaming down her face as Clark took the ring from the box and slid off the porch swing to kneel in front of her. Alara Finch, he said formally, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Maya's mother and help us build a life based on truth and love and really good pancakes? Yes, Alara whispered, then louder, yes, absolutely yes. As Clark slipped his mother's ring onto Alara's finger, Maya clapped her hands in delight. This is the best day ever. Wait until I tell everyone at school that I solved a crime and got a new mom. Clark and Alara laughed through their tears, holding each other. And Maya as the sun set over Maplewood Heights. Tomorrow would bring Vincent's arrest, media attention, and the long process of healing from 15 years of manipulation and trauma. But tonight, they were a family who had chosen each other despite impossible odds, thanks to the bravery of a 10-year-old detective who refused to let the bad guys win. Vincent Sterling's plan to isolate and control Alara had backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying her support system, his actions had revealed just how strong that support system truly was, and how far they would go to protect each other. As Maya fell asleep between her father and her soon-to-be stepmother, Clark and Alara began planning not just a wedding, but a future built on the foundation of a love that had survived its first major test. "Thank you," Alara whispered to Clark as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. "For what?" "For helping a stranger climb out of a window," she said. "For giving me a family again. For loving me enough to fight for us." "Thank you," Clark replied. "For being brave enough to trust me. For loving Maya like she's your own. For showing me what real love looks like." Above them, the stars shone down on a family that had been forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. A family that would face whatever came next together. 6 months later, Clark stood at the altar of Thornfield Community Church, adjusting his tie nervously as he waited for his bride to appear. The church was packed with friends, family, and supporters who had rallied around them once Vincent Sterling's true nature had been exposed. Even some of the clients Clark had lost during the media storm had returned, sheepishly admitting they'd been wrong to doubt him. Maya, resplendent in her junior bridesmaid dress, appeared at the church doors first, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone entrusted with an important mission. She caught Clark's eye and gave him a thumbs up, their secret signal that meant everything is perfect. Then Alara appeared, and Clark's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple but elegant white dress, nothing like the elaborate gown she'd escaped from 6 months ago. This dress reflected who she truly was: strong, beautiful, and free. Her auburn hair was styled in loose waves, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Maya had helped her pick that morning. But what took Clark's breath away wasn't her appearance. It was the radiant joy on her face as she walked down the aisle toward him. This was a woman choosing love freely, walking toward a future she had actively created, rather than one that had been imposed upon her. Sarah Chun walked Alara down the aisle, having volunteered for the honor when Alara mentioned she had no family left to fill the role. "Families aren't just born," Sarah had said. "Sometimes they're built by people who choose to love each other." As Alara reached the altar, Clark took her hands in his, marveling at how different this moment felt from the crisis that had brought them together. "You made it," he whispered, echoing the words he'd spoken when she'd climbed out of that window months ago. "We made it," she corrected, squeezing his hands. The ceremony was officiated by Judge Patricia Williams, the federal judge who had overseen Vincent Sterling's case. She'd volunteered for the honor after being deeply moved by the family's story and Maya's role in exposing Sterling's crimes. "Dearly beloved," Judge Williams began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate not just the union of Clark and Alara, but the triumph of love over manipulation, truth over deception, and family over fear." As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, Clark and Alara spoke not just about their love for each other, but about their commitment to building a life based on honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to face challenges together. "Alara," Clark said, his voice steady and sure, "6 months ago, you taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what's expected and toward what's true. Today, I promise to always support your courage, to value your strength, and to never let anyone make you feel small or controlled again." "Clark," Alara replied, tears of joy streaming down her face, "you and Maya showed me what real family looks like. Not perfect, but genuine. Not controlled, but chosen. I promise to be the mother Maya deserves, the partner you can count on, and to never take for granted the gift of being truly seen and loved." When Judge Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Maya launched herself at both of them, creating a 3-way hug that perfectly captured their unconventional but beautiful family dynamic. The reception was held at the newly opened Finch Community Center, a facility that Alara had funded using her inheritance, the money that Vincent had spent 15 years trying to steal. The center provided resources for families in crisis, including legal aid, counseling services, and temporary housing for those escaping dangerous situations. It's what my parents would have wanted, Ilara explained to the gathered guests during her reception speech. They believed in building things that helped people. This center isn't just a memorial to them. It's a promise that other families won't have to face alone what we went through. The centerpiece of the center was the Maya Chun Detective Training Room, a computer lab where young people could learn digital safety and investigation skills. Maya had insisted that other kids should know how to protect themselves and their families using technology. Maya single-handedly solved a case that law enforcement had been working on for months, Agent Torres said during her toast. If that's not worth honoring, I don't know what is. Maya, who had spent the past 6 months giving interviews to child safety organizations and appearing on educational programs about digital literacy, took her honorary recognition with characteristic 10-year-old pragmatism. The important thing is that bad people went to jail and good people stayed together, she announced to the reception crowd. Also, the cake is really good, and everyone should try it before it's gone. Vincent Sterling himself was notably absent from the celebration, as he was currently serving a 25-year federal sentence for money laundering, racketeering, witness intimidation, and the murders of Thomas and Helen Finch. The evidence Maya had gathered, combined with testimony from the witnesses Ilara's private investigator had found, had created an airtight case that even Vincent's expensive lawyers couldn't overcome. The media narrative that had once painted Ilara as unstable had completely reversed. She was now held up as an example of courage and resilience, while Vincent's story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and wealth. Clark's business, Maplewood Audio Services, had not only recovered but expanded dramatically. The publicity from the case, once the truth came out, had brought him clients from across the region, who specifically wanted to work with the man who had stood by his principles despite enormous pressure. Turns out helping people in crisis is good for business, Clark joked to his sister. Who knew that doing the right thing would actually pay off financially? But the real transformation was visible in the family dynamic itself. Maya, who had always been mature for her age, had gained a confidence and sense of agency that came from knowing she had the power to protect the people she loved. Ilara had rediscovered the strength and independence that Vincent had spent years trying to suppress. And Clark had learned that love didn't require sacrifice of his principles. It required the courage to stand by them. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Clark, Ilara, and Maya found themselves alone in the community center, surrounded by the flowers and decorations from their perfect day. So what happens now? Maya asked, settling onto a couch in the center's family room. Are we going to have a normal life now that all the bad guys are in jail? Clark and Ilara looked at each other and laughed. I don't think we've ever been a normal family, Maya, Ilara said. And I like us exactly the way we are. Besides, Clark added, pulling both his wife and daughter close, normal is overrated. We're extraordinary. Maya considered this seriously. Can we still have pancakes on Sunday mornings? Because that's the best part of being extraordinary. Absolutely, Ilara promised. Pancakes are non-negotiable. As they sat together in the building that represented hope and healing for families in crisis, Clark reflected on how much had changed. Since that desperate afternoon when he'd seen a woman in white tapping on a second-story window. He'd thought he was simply helping a stranger in distress. Instead, he'd found his soulmate, given Maya the mother she deserved, and helped expose a killer who had escaped justice for 15 years. Do you ever think about that window? Ilara asked, as if reading his thoughts. About what would have happened if you hadn't seen me, or if you decided it wasn't your problem. Every day, Clark admitted. But I try to focus on what actually happened instead. We found each other. We chose each other. We built something beautiful together. And we're going to keep building, Maya added. Because that's what families do. Outside the community center, The lights of Thornfield twinkled in the gathering dusk. It was the same town where Vincent Sterling had once wielded unchecked power, where corruption had masqueraded as respectability, where a young girl had lost her parents to greed and manipulation. But it was also the town where a single father had chosen courage over convenience, where a 10-year-old had refused to let evil triumph, where a woman had finally found the strength to reclaim her stolen life. As Clark locked up the community center and helped his family into their car, Maya chattering about the wedding cake, and Alara humming the song they'd danced to, he realized that the most important transformations weren't always the dramatic ones. Sometimes the greatest victories came from the simple decision to show up for the people you love. Day after day, choice after choice, driving home through the familiar streets of Maplewood Heights, past the house where their story had begun and toward the future they would write together. Clark understood that happy endings weren't really endings at all. They were beginnings disguised as conclusions, promises disguised as achievements, and hope disguised as certainty. The window Alara had climbed through 6 months ago had led her away from a nightmare and toward a dream she hadn't even dared to imagine. Now, as she sat in the passenger seat, wearing her wedding ring and listening to Maya plan their honeymoon activities, she realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that the person extending their hand to help you is exactly who they appear to be. "I love you," she whispered to Clark as they pulled into their driveway. "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you. Forever." "Forever and always," Maya added from the back seat, completing their family motto. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss and their engagement now shone down on their wedding night, constant and bright in an ever-changing world. And in the house where 3 strangers had become a family, the lights stayed on late into the night as they celebrated not just their wedding, but the extraordinary life they had chosen to build together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.